capable force, the combination is sheer destruction for our radical Islamist Iranian adversaries. They are toast, and they know it.
Since Saturday, U.S. and Israeli attacks across Iran have killed at least 1,045 people. That's according to Iranian state media. The capital, Tehran, has been under intense bombardment. Government buildings have been destroyed. Homes and hospitals have also been damaged. Turkey has become the latest country dragged into the conflict. A ballistic missile fired from Iran towards its airspace has been shot down by NATO's air defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. The Pentagon says it doesn't anticipate the incident will bring NATO into the war. The Pentagon's released footage of its submarine torpedoing an Iranian naval vessel in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka has rescued 32 submariners after receiving a distress call. The country's deputy foreign minister says at least 87 people were killed. Israel has carried out a new wave of strikes across Lebanon in its rapidly escalating attack on the country. It struck what it's called Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Beirut. The Israeli military has also made ground incursions into several towns in southern Lebanon. Now we've got correspondents in Doha, Washington, D.C., Beirut and Tehran, and that's where we're going to begin. Mohammed Val is live for us in the Iranian capital. So Israeli military says it's carrying out broad strikes in Iran. What more do we know?
Yeah, there are reports of strikes all over Iran right now. Several places around the country have been hit, and we mentioned here Tehran, of course, many areas around Tehran, and also Kharaj, Qazvin, Shiraz, and also Kurdistan, the Iranian Kurdistan region, where an army barracks has been targeted, according to some of those reports. There are areas also near Tehran where some people have been killed, 14 people. So it's across the country. That's true. The Israelis have announced that they are expanding their campaign across Iran, their air campaign, and it is happening. And the Iranians are bracing for it. On the other hand, the Iranian army and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are talking about stepping up their reaction, defensive activities, defensive systems being activated here in Tehran over the last hour or so, and also the 17th wave of the True Promise campaign, True Promise number 4, it has been underway this morning and afternoon. Strikes on Israel, several places mentioned, several military and security facilities in Israel mentioned, and also bases in Kuwait, U.S. bases in Kuwait, and in northern Iraq in Erbil. They are also talking about an oil tanker that has been set on fire or targeted with missiles in the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, the Navy, the Iranian Navy, despite the reports by Americans that it has been completely decimated, is still active according to the reports that we have. And they are striking American targets as far as 600 kilometers in the Indian Ocean and elsewhere. So this is basically the overall picture right now, and it is a picture of defiance here in Iran, despite the rhetoric and also the strong action by Americans and Israelis across the country.
Okay, let's talk about the mourning of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It, I understand, has now been postponed. And when I say mourning, we're talking about an official event with regard to that. Talk to us about what's been happening and why the postponement's taking place.
Yes, there were plans, Rob, for a farewell event at the Imam Khomeini mausoleum here in Tehran, and that was supposed to take place sometime today. But it has been postponed. It hasn't been cancelled. Reports we have, and it is postponed only because of some arrangements that have still to be made. We understand the security situation is very precarious across the country, and particularly here in Tehran. And the people in charge of this ceremony are trying to make sure that nobody is hurt, that no incidents take place, which is, of course, very difficult, considering that millions of people are expected to gather for this farewell ceremony. Most of citizens of the city of Tehran have left, understood that some of them will be returned just for this ceremony, and that means crowding of the streets, traffic jams and problems, logistics. But at the same time, also a member of the assembly of experts said that preparations are underway for the election of a new supreme leader for the country. He's not talking about the timing or how many days it's going to take, but he's talking about advanced stages in this regard, and the names are being circulated of who might be elected for this post. The reports we have is that there must be continuity in this country, reassured that things are in place, the country is still being run smoothly, and defense forces are still in action for the purposes of protecting the country.
Mohammed Val in Tehran, thank you very much indeed. Spain's Prime Minister has doubled down on his criticism of the attack on Iran by the US. The conflict risked playing Russian roulette with the lives of millions. Pedro Sanchez was responding to US President Donald Trump's threat. The bombing of Iran as reckless and illegal. He's also barred US aircraft involved in the operation from using Spanish naval and air bases.
We should learn from history, and we can't play Russian roulette with the destiny of millions of people. The powers involved in this conflict should and the rest Venezuela and
they have concerns about the legitimacy of the act.
Absolutely. And all of that is compounded unified response to what the Europeans want. EU Council President, as well as the French President, about solidarity. We have with us the Foreign Minister of Belgium, Mr. Maxime Perrault. Thank you very much for taking the time. And how do you take this whole saga about the US hinting at a trade embargo on Spain?
Well, first, in the Middle East, regaining stability and security, and with the foreign minister of the Gulf region of Jordan, result a ceasefire as soon as possible. We advocated for desescalation, of course, in order to avoid other new casualties. It many killed. So I think that the attack launched by the US and Israel, we all know that are not with the standards of international law, but it is true that in the same time, the way Iran responded and is still respond with many with the international law. We have tried for many years, thanks to the diplomacy, to achieve a result and avoid such a crisis. We, the EU, the United States, and the E3, we try to achieve a solution thanks to the diplomacy, and I would like to commend all the efforts made by Oman. But finally, we've not the reason to create a destabilization of the whole region.
Well, currently in that destabilization phase. How do you feel that Europe was left out of decision making? Remember, the JCPOA was essentially a European project. America was on board. Now, throughout this negotiation that was happening, the Europeans were not consulted. And even in this military action, which you say that is unlawful, so where does Europe stand, and can Europe actually play a role rather than just expressing its wishes that it should be de-escalated?
But even if it is not complying with the standards of the international law, frankly speaking, as I mentioned in the Belgian parliament, I understand why the US and Israel these attacks. Frankly speaking, Iran was not a model student regarding the respect of international law, with a lot of threats against its own population, responding to all manifestations with violence, with torture. We know that they've continued to develop the ballistic program, also the nuclear weapons program. So it was time to say stop to the way Iran was managing its country. And
Via unilateral strikes, is that what you're saying?
But by action, because has demonstrated also its limits in this situation. And of course, and it is really important to pay attention to the UN Charter and to de-escalate in order to let the diplomacy expected. And I think that the aspiration of the Irans need to support this aspiration, of course. The conflicts, and it's not acceptable to be threatened for that. And I with my counterpart coming from Spain, but we.
So do you think America should be condemned for that trade embargo?
I think that sharing threats to allies is certainly not the best way to manage a difference. We absolutely need to respect each other and try to reinforce a common view in order to answer to the situation in the Union, to speak with one voice on several issues with Gaza, we've seen that sometime with Ukraine, depending of the attitude of Hungary. But I'm sure that tomorrow to make a common strong statement. And I think that is really important also to condemn the way Iran is responding with many missiles targeting the neighboring countries. It is not acceptable, and we are really in full and total solidarity with the Gulf country and Jordan, of course. And globally in the Middle East, we also support Israel not taking advantage of the
is a picture of Golestan Palace and the
In studio is Paul Musgrave. He's an associate professor at Georgetown University, Qatar. He focuses on U.S. foreign policy. It's really good to have you with us. I want to start, though, with something that's maybe slightly out with your remit, but I do want to get your opinion on this because you are an expert in this region. This afternoon, we've had Qatar's foreign minister and the foreign minister of Iran talking. They have not agreed on terms of the way that Iran has been firing missiles at Qatar, but the very fact the conversation was actually happening at all seems to be significant. And on the back of that, on X, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has issued a tweet both in Arabic and Farsi addressing heads of Arab states, but ending with, "We respect your sovereignty. We believe the security and stability of the region must be achieved through collective efforts of its states." Without wanting to go too deeply into this and make too many assumptions, is this a sign perhaps that Iran is, if not regretting the action that it's been taken against the Gulf states, is maybe rethinking it and is to some degree trying to reach out?
I think that rethinking its approach is exactly the right way to frame this. For the past several weeks, even before the commencement of hostilities, Tehran has been trying to drive a wedge between the GCC countries and the United States. And the GCC countries have been, quite happy and announced and saying they wouldn't let military assets on their soil be used for strikes against Iran. But since then, since the commencement of hostilities, Iran has carried out a playbook that might have been written before the decapitation strike that involved striking at not only air bases in Qatar and elsewhere, and of course the Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, but have also been targeting civilian and energy infrastructure in the GCC countries. I know that from the readout, when the Iranian foreign minister called Qatar's foreign minister and prime minister today, for Donald Trump, not so much. And what looks like a success from Israel's point of view doesn't really look quite that successful in the United States. So I think that President Trump, if really needs to look at the past several days and see how this war has actually gone.
Well, we've got about 40 seconds left, and I want to come back to that press conference as well, because it was a very interesting split between the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Pete Hegseth. There was a lot of statistics. Was there anything missing? We have about 25 seconds.
Yeah, so Secretary Hegseth gave a lot of statistics about how well the war is going. Felt like the Vietnam War, where there was always a body count or a data point. But the big question, the United States achieving its goals in this war, is the political resolution going to be what the U.S. wants? I don't think he said that.
Paul Musgrave, we appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up next, the Inside Story. Don't forget, we've got a lot more background on the website as well, aljazeera.com. I'm Rob Matheson. Stay with us.
How is the war playing out in Iran? The U.S.-Israeli assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other senior security figures has left a power vacuum. How challenging will it be to rebuild its leadership structure? And in light of the recent anti-government protests, could Iran descend into chaos? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Iran stands at a crossroads. With its top leadership assassinated early in the joint U.S.-Israeli offensive, the remaining layers of power have been trying to maintain control. There are concerns this war with two of its biggest enemies would lead to chaos. President Donald Trump has made clear his desire for regime change in Iran.
Just what I want with that.
Free music. Did various narratives for its objectives in striking Iran. Removing the current governing bodies from power.
Turns out the regime who chanted death to America and death to Israel gifted death from America and death from Israel. This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it.
Iran has responded with its own wave of attacks, launching drones and missiles at Israel and US assets in the region. Airports, seaports, hotels, civilian buildings and energy facilities have also been hit. Will continue.
They have advanced military technology and a large number of armed forces on land, sea and air. Everyone has seen what kind of campaign they have launched against us, and we have stood strong.
The impact has far-reaching consequences beyond the Gulf region. Oil and gas prices are soaring, markets are rattled, and neither side is showing any sign of standing down. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. Joining us on set is Sasan Karimi, a former deputy to Iran's vice president for strategic affairs. In Beirut is Maha Yahya, director of the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center. And in Florida is Christopher Hill, a former U.S. diplomat and ambassador to Iraq. So much for joining us today on Inside Story. Sasan, let me start with you today. Iran is still attempting to fill in this power vacuum that's been caused by U.S. attacks. Let me ask you, how challenging is it going to be for Iran to rebuild its power structure?
Thank you for having me first. You know, it is not that much vague because Iran has very fully polished and well-polished constitutional law that predicts all the
government amongst the population that all of this could
few people outside the country, diaspora, can play another role, or the dependent populations. But inside the country, we have a kind of unity, which is very beautiful in the very that when, for example, very close to my own home, you know, 20 meters only away. People are cooperating in the movies. You can see the very beautiful cooperation and unity. So that is the way during the Iran-Iraq war, which lasted for 8 years, with the whole world behind Saddam Hussein, Iranians could resist.
Maha, let me turn to you now. The Trump administration seems to be making the case or the argument that they believe that this conflict and perhaps an internal uprising in Iran could put an end to the current regime there. I want to ask you, from your vantage point, is that a credible argument? Is that a believable narrative?
Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for having me. No, it's not. At least at this moment, it's not a very credible argument, partly because there is no organized opposition that is able to take charge of the country. Iran is a country of 90 million people, multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian, and as your guest described, one with multiple centers of power across different institutions and organizations. So, and at this moment, the only, I would say, declared opposition, not necessarily credible, but declared opposition, is the son of the former Shah, Pahlavi, who is based outside and has very little connections to the country. Internally, we haven't seen an organized opposition. And this idea that somehow a Kurdish uprising, because this is only likely to lead, if this were to happen, if some Kurdish separatist groups were to take the bait, as they say, this will only lead to internal strife and possibly greater chaos. What we're hearing is not just about the potential arming by the CIA of separatist groups, but also we've seen a very concerted attack by the US and the Israeli armed forces, the airplanes, of security checkpoints, of police stations, that entire region. So they're going directly after the state's security apparatus, which means it will become also a very chaotic environment down the road. Even if the bombs were to stop tomorrow, the situation within Iran is going to remain quite tenuous. But I don't see a kind of credible opposition, at least at this moment, rising up to take the reins, so to speak, unless there is an arrangement with someone from within the system. And I think in a post-conflict Iraq, we're likely to see even greater repression than what we've seen so far, in part because whoever is going to take over will have very limited fiscal space, for example, to address the needs of a population that was already very discontent with the lack of jobs, everything that had been going on.
Ambassador Hill, I think it's safe to say there's been a lot of mixed messaging when it comes to U.S. officials and the rationale into this war. You've had some suggesting that it was because they knew that Israel was going to strike first, and others saying, no, in fact, the U.S. was, the entity that tipped the hand of Israel. Questions as to if this is about regime change or if there was an imminent threat. When we hear so many different versions of what the rationale is for this war, what does that do to the credibility of the U.S. in this region?
Well, I think that's certainly a fair point. I mean, there has been the term regime change, which is usually associated with failure, policy failure. They seem to have throttled that back a little. You don't hear a lot of regime change. But I think a couple of points need to be made. First of all, there's absolutely no support, no sympathy whatsoever in this country for the rule of Ayatollah Khomeini. I mean, the idea of represent has come to symbolize over the last 38 years is something extremely negative in terms of its position in the world. It's got some friends, it's got some partners, but it's very unclear that those partners can do anything to help Iran in this situation. I think, secondly, it's important to understand that the U.S. military knows what it's doing, and we've seen rather these airstrikes. But the question, of course, is as your question is, what next? I think the U.S. military will be able to look back on this and say, we have seriously degraded any offensive capability that Iran had. That is, they're not going to be able to launch attacks in the future. Their missile force will be decimated. Their naval force, which has occasionally been able to move into Hormuz and create a uncertainty about whether that can remain open, that is being devastated. I think it's pretty clear the nuclear program, although there are different disagreements as to how extensive that was in the first place, that is also being decimated. So the capacity of Iran to create problems outside of its borders has been sharply attenuated in the last 100 hours. And I might add, this is not going to end today. I mean, this is going to continue. But next, I must say, the U.S. has not been present in Iran for since 1980, since our embassy was frankly taken hostage, where our diplomats were subjected to these, being blindfolded for weeks on end and threatened with mock executions, et cetera. We have not had any diplomatic relations or diplomatic presence in that country. So I think it's fair to say that we don't know a lot about these internal issues going on in Iran. Often, we did in Iraq, we turned to people who were from the gray community, and many of them had judgments about Iraq that were entirely wrong in terms of what was going on internally. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little of that today. What is clear to me is that there are a lot of guns there, a lot of differing opinions within Iran. And what worries me, of course, is as you see this attenuation of the state, whether it's police force or army, what I am concerned about, of course, is you'll have a kind of civil unrest grow and turn into a civil war. And anyone who's ever witnessed a civil war pays for that, and they tend to be innocent civilians. So I think these are really difficult moments for Iran. At some point, I think the U.S. will claim success in saying that it's prevented Iran from doing any more mischief overseas. And maybe the Iranians will show, or the Iranian regime, I'm not even sure what to call it today, will want to show. So far, all it's done is galvanized all the Gulf states against it. And now it's going to get Turkey involved against it. It's really, I think the Iranians, whatever their leadership, they're certainly not showing good judgment. So the real issue ahead is if the U.S. claims some kind of victory, what's going to become of Iran? And at that point, I think it's really going to be a question, not for the Kurds, and I completely agree, it's a misguided strategy. It's not about the Kurds. It's not about any other such element. It's going to be about within Iran and how these 90 million people are going to find be able to determine a governing structure that will calm that country down and allow Iran to realize its potential, a potential that clearly exists in its civilization, if not in its governing structures.
Let me ask you, there is this argument that what remains of Iranian leadership is going to be struggling for survival. I want to ask you about that. How complex? We know that it has parallel armies, that it has multiple intelligence services, several command structures. How complicated is all of this?
It's quite complicated, but I don't think the issue is whether they're struggling for survival per se as individuals. I think the entire system, I mean, for Iran, this was very much this presented an existential crisis. In the same way, I mean, their reaction, for example, to the protests a month and a half ago was brutal. And in part because it's a weakened regime, it's unable to address internal discontent. And therefore, it came down with an iron fist. Now we have an external war that's literally, crippling the various institutions within the state, various centers of power. Once the dust settles, it's going to be very difficult for them to address all the things that are going to emerge, whether it's, and I agree with your guest, the issue of civil strife will be looming in a very big way, in addition to the day-to-day discontent with et cetera, as well as inflation, the value of the Iranian rial, etc. So I think the struggle there will be how to maintain cohesion whilst and keep control over the vast territory, whilst trying to grapple with all the different governance issues that will emerge. Again, is a mistake. Until now, for example, we have not seen, and these are the things, as an observer, I'd be looking for. We haven't seen any cracks within the security sector, no leaks within the political elite. Everyone's come together in a very strong way to defend the system. Now, once the dust of battle settles, that's a different question altogether. Worry, because what we're seeing today is in America and in Israel that have opened, they've shot the first shot They've launched into a war of choice, frankly. This is a war of choice. There was no direct, all the security assessments we're seeing, there was no direct threat to the United States of America. So this was a war of choice that was launched and that has dragged the entire region and frankly beyond the region. We're seeing the impact, for example, of in gas prices, the whole energy supply networks in Europe, among other places. So Europe, some countries in Europe are starting to get embroiled into this because the US and Israel went into this without any kind of coordination, even with their allies. Unlike 2003, for example, when George Bush went into Iraq, or even 1991, international coalition that went through the UN, there was international support for this. In this case, there's no support, or there's very little support. People were taken, countries, allies, everyone was taken by. The escalation was very rapid, and it's brought everyone into the fray. And I think, frankly, that's also. And we were all also, surprised by the fact that they very quickly went after all countries in the Gulf, including Qatar and Oman, both of which are countries that were trying to mediate between solutions, whether it's, it took many of us by surprise that they would launch these all-out attacks, not only on American.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to, the point that you're making, I actually want to ask Sasan about, because he's also reacting to what you're saying. Look, you heard Maha there talking about the fact that, this has spiraled to include the region at this point. And she was also talking about the Iranian attacks on neighboring countries, including Qatar, of course. We know Iran has responded with this wave of attacks the past few days. They've launched drones and missiles at Israel and U.S. assets in these countries. The foreign minister of Iran says that these assaults will continue. From your vantage point, can Iran now get to a point where things can de-escalate? And how does that happen?
Let me, before answering to your question, from the end. The story is that invading another country is totally abandoned by the United Nations Charter, okay? Unless you have a resolution under Chapter 7, Article number 52, which you don't have. Internally, you don't have. So it is internally and internationally unlawful to attack. Has not initiated any attack to its foreign, its neighbors. Always Iran wants to raise friendship hand to them, especially the Arab countries, especially said Qatar and Oman and also Turkey were the ones who wanted to mediate between Iran and the United States. Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? Who attacked the other party of the talks in the middle of talks? So this is not a trustful or a trust-building behavior. Who can talk about a further round of talks between Iran and the United States in Iran? For the third time during the talks, we should be attacked? Who is the country in the region who initiated the war? Who is the country in the region who initiated attacks against 5 countries? Syria, Lebanon, and Qatar, Israel. Who is mentioning and talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran. 100 years ago up until now.
Hassan, I'm
and
sorry.
they are all only remedials.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we just don't have much time left. I want to ask you, you're talking about friendly countries and trying to establish these relationships. How do you begin to rebuild trust with these countries and these countries by Iran?
Yeah, you know, that's why, that's because of the fact that our civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, including 165 already killed and attacked by the United States from these bases around us. So we attack them as a remedial measure, not initiate any attack to our neighbor. De-escalation is possible, but Iranians are furious, but I never heard.
And Ambassador Hill, I just need to ask you, there is a lot of speculation right now as to whether or not the U.S. would attempt to put boots on the ground in Iran. You were addressing that somewhat in your answer earlier, but I want to know from your vantage point, do you think that is something that is on the table now that the Trump administration would attempt going forward?
I would be reluctant to say that there's anything not on the table. But that said, I believe it is extremely unlikely to see so-called boots. I would like to take exception to the notion that Iran was innocently sitting around and suddenly was brutally attacked by the United States and Israel. Iran has been a huge by a improvised explosive device, something called. I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is an innocent in this. Iran has been belligerent in its neighborhood and frankly to the world at large, and one hopes that when the dust finally settles and they get through this, that Iran can again take its place as a responsible state.
Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation. And thanks so much to all of our guests, Hassan Karimi, Maha Yahya, and Christopher Hill. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.
It is 18 GMT, and you're watching Al Jazeera's coverage of the conflict between the U.S. and Israel, as long as President Donald Trump decides. Speaking at the Pentagon earlier, he also told reporters that the U.S. has unleashed sheer destruction on Iran.
We are only 4 days into this, and the results have been incredible. Historic, really. Only the United States of America could lead us. But when you add the Israeli Defense Forces, a devastatingly capable force, the combination is sheer destruction for our radical Islamist Iranian adversaries. They are toast, and they know it.
The U.S. and Israeli strikes have pounded cities across Iran. The capital, Tehran, has endured some of the worst. Today, U.S. and Israeli attacks across Iran have killed at least 1,045 people. That is according to Iranian state media. A missile fired from Iran towards its airspace was shot down by NATO's air defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. The Pentagon saying that it does not anticipate that this incident will bring NATO into the war, because Turkey, of course, is a NATO member. Sri Lanka has rescued 32 submariners after receiving a distress call. The country's deputy foreign minister saying that at least 87 people were killed in that attack. Israel has carried out a new wave of strikes across Lebanon, killing at least 72 people and injuring hundreds since Monday. It has also made ground incursions into several towns in southern Lebanon. Well, Al Jazeera is live in Tehran, in Qatar's capital, Doha, in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, and in Washington, D.C. The U.S. says that it is confident about the operation against Iran. Speaking at the Pentagon, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, warned that Washington is stepping up attacks on infrastructure. Kane said 500 ballistic missiles have so far been launched by Iran, as well as more than 2,000 drones. But he stressed that the number of ballistic missiles fired by Iran has declined by 86% since the first day of fighting. So those are a few numbers that we have on day 5. Manuel Rapallo is in Washington, D.C. Manuel, you followed that briefing. We're 100 hours in. Give us more detail on what we found out from the Pentagon. What does the U.S. military say that it has achieved so far, and what is the priority moving forward?
Good to be with you, Cyril. As you mentioned, this was a press conference by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, as well as Secretary of Defense Hegseth. This was very much an operational update over the United States military advances so far since operations began. You said now 100 hours into this conflict. Secretary of Defense Hegseth touted what he says is an all-out that America is winning. In no uncertain terms, America is winning. He touted the sinking of an Iranian warship by an American torpedo, saying that this is something that hasn't occurred since World War II. He spoke about naval and air superiority by the United States, the undermining of the Iranian Navy, the fact that the United States now controls the airspace over Iran, the destruction of Iranian missile capabilities, and the number of targets that have been hit. This is something that we also heard at length from the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. More of an operational update than anything else.
Heidi Jo Castro is on Capitol Hill. Heidi, you're monitoring what's happening in Congress. You're expecting a Senate vote a little later that could, in theory, I stress in theory, limit this U.S. military campaign. Run us through that.
That's right. In theory is the perfect wording, because the U.S. Constitution does say that it is Congress that should authorize, decide whether the U.S. is at war. But in practice, President Trump launched this war against Iran without asking permission from anyone, and Democrats here in Capitol Hill, they have a problem with that. So in the coming hours, we're expecting Senator Tim Kaine to force a vote on a resolution that would seek to constrain Trump's war powers in Iran. That is a piece of bill that is co-sponsored by a Republican, Rand Paul, but he is the only Republican so far in the Senate who has said he supports this, and they need at least 4 others to cross the line to make this pass in the Republican-controlled chamber. That is unlikely to happen. And even if that tall hurdle is overcome today, the same resolution would need to pass the Republican-controlled House, and then President Trump could just wave it all away with a presidential veto. So what is the purpose of that? Say it's important to get members on the record here, and that it's important to enact, to try to use congressional authority as the U.S. Constitution authorizes them. But again, it's an uphill battle and unlikely to pass today.
American munition stockpiles and how long the U.S. could potentially sustain this military effort, given how much it's consuming interceptors and missiles. What details did you get on that from the Pentagon?
As you mentioned, Cyril, that have been like this, and whether or not the stockpiles of munitions could hold. What we heard today at the Pentagon by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is that, quote, the United States is accelerating its operations and has a practically unlimited stockpile, and that capable of, quote, sustaining this fight for as it takes. This obviously is contradicting other claims that we're hearing that the defense contractors like Lockheed Martin are supposed to be meeting at the White House at the end of this week on Friday to talk about a it's part of the criticism that we're hearing over what many are calling mixed messages from senior officials of the Trump administration. And we should note here also that in the immediate aftermath of those first attacks on Friday by the United States against Iran, there was a sort of understanding that President Trump would not be pursuing or seeking to make this a prolonged conflict. Politically savvy and understands very well the optics of what it would look like for American service members to be returning to the United States from Iran in caskets draped in America. Not a good optic for him politically, especially with the midterm elections coming up later in November. So the longer this conflict drags on, the more he'll have to answer to his base. The more American service members are killed, the more he'll have to answer to his base, which is seeing a rift growing over what many see as a betrayal of his promise to not be pursuing these endless foreign wars.
Yeah, and 6 American soldiers have been killed so far. Mike Hanna, you're at the White House. So the Pentagon laid out its military objectives, which are destroy Iran's military capabilities, make sure it can never have a nuclear bomb. All of that is expected to take several weeks. We don't know how many. Has the president explained what he envisions after that? And Mike, by the way, I'll just let our viewers know that we are expecting that we will, and you'll help us do that. But for now, has the U.S. president explained what he sees happening with Iran after his military campaign?
No, we haven't got that far at all. We do not know or have any indication of what the exit ramp is here. We actually do not know what the end aim of the U.S. president is and his administration. At what point will the administration and President Trump believe that the aims have been achieved? We do not know any of that. We are on the press secretary. The podium is up there waiting for her to come in, and maybe some light may be cast on some of these questions. But they are very fundamental questions which will be asked in the Senate debate, which will be going on ahead shortly. But there have been no clear answers. We've heard repeatedly from President Trump as to what the operational aims are. We've heard that from the Pentagon as well. But we haven't heard what the end aim is, what the final. And as Manny was saying a little bit earlier, the longer this conflict lasts, the more problematic it gets politically for the president domestically. So those are the issues that are being faced here. But President time frame, he has facilitated in a way on a time frame, speaking at the beginning of the conflict, 3 to 4 days, that then suddenly went to 4 weeks or more. And now we hear from the Pentagon that there is no timeline on this, that the operations will continue until the objectives are achieved, without saying what the objective is. So it's how long is a piece of string is basically the fundamental question we're looking at.
Yeah, back to Capitol Hill for this fundamental question of how much support or pushback there is for this war in the country. Heidi Jo Castro, you have obviously your finger on the pulse of Congress. How much support versus pushback are you seeing there and even beyond Congress?
Well, Sarah, Republicans here on the Hill were hearing pretty much ironclad support for the administration launching these attacks on Iran, save for Rand Paul. Of course, that's the senator who co-sponsoring this War Act resolution along with the Democrat Tim Kaine. But again, that resolution unlikely to have much traction today or through the House. But we did hear strong rebukes coming from the Senate minority Pentagon, saying that it sounds like, he said that the U.S. was just getting started in this war, that it seemed open-ended and was expanding, and he's feared that eventually Trump might order U.S. boots on the ground in Iran, which he pointed out is very much opposed by the U.S. public. In fact, so far, This war has been deeply unpopular with the general American electorate, with only 1 in 4 saying that they agreed, that they approved with these decisions taken by Trump. And so just as Manny was saying, this might be the ultimate check on Trump's powers here. If Congress does not enact these war resolutions and does not take that constitutionally ordained authority, then it might be the U.S. electorate in the upcoming midterm elections. I've been hearing on the, including Trump himself, saying that they do not like this is headed. They're very concerned with the open-ended nature of this conflict, and they might take that out against Trump in the polls in November.
Let's see what we can learn from Iran now. Mohammed, the U.S. says it has destroyed the Iranian Navy and is about to achieve complete control of Iranian skies from a military standpoint. What are you able to report, and what if...
Yes, Cyril, in terms of explosion heard in the northern part of Tehran just a while ago, and that's just one of many. Today, we have many cities that have been targeted. Aside from Tehran, we have Bushehr, we have Isfahan, we have Qazwin. Qazwin, where 6 people were killed, and also eastern Azerbaijan in the northeast of the country. And the scope of the bombardment is also widening. So the Americans are true to their promise, and the Israelis, they are widening this war here in Iran from the air. And it is hurting. Civilians are being killed, and the devastation is getting more and more visible. But at the same time, the Iranians are still defiant, and they have announced, the Revolutionary Guard has announced the 18th wave of the True Promise #4 campaign to resist and to defend the country. It takes a bit to get the details targeted by this 18th wave. But we understand that there is a lot of damage, according to the Iranians, being inflicted on the enemy. They are talking about a widespread range of targets inside Israel over the day, and also about ships that have been targeted. One of them is still on fire in the Strait of Hormuz. In respect to their promise of closing the Strait of Hormuz as a part of this campaign, and there's also reports of other explosions and other drones sent against U.S. Targets in Kuwait and North Iraq.
Nida Ibrahim is in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nida, on your end, what's the news out of Israel on day 5 of this military campaign?
Well, the Israeli authorities are talking about estimates of 1 week of the war in Iran. That would be on Saturday, and they're talking about $2 billion of losses expected to be targeting the facilities, the infrastructure, as well as the Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has